thank you so much for the project you're currently involved with that has you adapting and learning some new things for a musical portion telling a Tlingit myth for our film about Preston Singletary, Visions in the Fire. So I want you to briefly tell us a little bit about that and all the roles that you do commercially, in case people want to get to
Okay.
know you a little bit better.
Yeah. Regarding the modern creation story, which is, I believe, a Tlingit myth about how the Raven. That's definitely a myth. Let's back up and start over again. This is where you cut. All right. So the uh, the modern creation story is a mythological story about how the Raven character tricks an Indian chief's daughter into bearing his child, and as a way of gaining access to this series of boxes that contain the tribe's treasures. And it's a really beautiful story, and it's basically talks about releasing light into the world, and it's their interpretation of modern creation, which as a former Christian, it's a real contrast from what I've been taught about Adam and Eve and all that. Anyway, I find it fascinating. A really beautiful, short, sweet story, and their narration and music is really gorgeous. And so you've asked me to be involved with producing an introduction video, and we talked about different ways of doing this. And I thought it would be best portrayed as sort of like a child's fable storybook kind of animation. And so I'm working on some stylizations of the characters and finding a way to animate them to this pre-recorded story. And so I'm basically learning the animation process, frame by frame drawing, which is something I've always been fascinated by. And it's taking a while, but we're getting there, and I'm really enjoying it. So I appreciate the opportunity to do this because with a lot of things that people learn, it's easy to kind of explore and dabble, but when you have a project in front of you to really sink your teeth into, it's a great motivator, and it kind of puts sort of a deadline goal in front of you, which I think for me, it's a good motivator.
I did want you to mention your what are your commercial services, or even like with what are some skills that you don't really have the you're not looking for clients, but I know you do a ton of things.
Oh, just
really
the
well.
range of stuff I do? Okay. Well, the range of work that I typically do for clients these days, in addition to shooting video, and it could be for interviews, corporate presentations, product interviews, Kickstarter campaigns, dance and music performances, and also short narration films. I also do motion graphics, which I really enjoy. That's primarily with After Effects, a little bit of 3D work, but primarily After Effects. And editing. So I do, this is the editing and motion graphics is kind of bailing me out right now because, shoots are pretty much on hold. So I do mostly that. And again, having played music for years, I've done a little bit of music editing, nothing in the way of composition though. But it's essentially all falls under the realm of post-production.
Yeah, and I know you to be very detail oriented, which is enjoyable. To work with. I know we've worked many dozens of times together. And you are this. I think this is just something you did for fun, but your Photoshop skills. You put me as a sound mixer, a character in the group photos of
Revenant.
3 or 4 famous films. One of the Batman films.
Yeah.
And
you weren't on that? You really weren't on that set?
Well, no, actually, I guess I should commend you for your research skills to find those photos, because due to some contractual issues, they didn't want me associated with those films.
But I can't understand why.
But you found the photos, so let the lawsuits flow. I'm back in the money.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I understand that Revenant shoot was very taxing on a lot of crew members. Long hours, cold weather. Yeah. It's tough, but I believe credit where credit's due, or something to that.
Yeah.
ex-
Anyway,
idea.
you're talented with Photoshop,
Yeah.
to say the least. I did want to open up a little bit to younger people, or I've heard with screenwriters, the polite thing to say is new screenwriters as opposed to young screenwriters, because some people get really good when they're 60 or 70 or 55. You know, there's no age limit to embracing a task and finding a gift for it. So what are some advice or any anecdotes from your own life getting into this industry that we're in?
Well, regarding the comments that you made about, new versus young and whatever, getting into the industry, I think the sooner anybody commits to doing something, and by commit, I mean really, really focus and really decide that they're going to, go in full bore. I think the sooner you do that, the sooner you realize whether it's right for you or not, and also you realize what you don't know. And that's always the challenge, whether you want to become a baker or bricklayer, candlestick maker, or film editor, or whatever. Technology-wise, there's never been a better time. I mean, as far as the gear and the software, my God, there are no excuses. You can do anything you want. The operative word is want. Do you really want to do this, or do you really like to do this? I've been in plenty of bands where people like the idea of being in a band. I want to pick up girls, or I want to be on stage. I want to stroke my ego. Yeah, okay, I want to do that too, but are you committed to doing it? And I've worked around plenty of those musicians that were kind of like along for the ride, and they would show up late for gigs and rehearsals, or not rehearsal at all. They wouldn't do their homework. They wouldn't learn their tunes. They weren't on task, basically. And ultimately they dropped out. Very few people with that kind of mentality will ever thrive, because you have to write like 100 crappy songs before you write your first good one. You might get lucky with number 50, but the next 50 are still going to be crap, It's the same with filmmaking. It's the same with running your audio gear, or like learning animation. Believe me, you should see some of my first animations. So you have to really want, and you have to really commit. And so the sooner you can do that, whatever the trade is, the sooner you do that, the sooner you'll know whether it's the path you want to go. If you think it would be a fun thing to do, that's not going to cut it. You have to be willing to put in crazy hours. I mean, unlike a 9-to-5 job, being on film set is quite often a 12 to 14-hour day. And that's not just one day or just one weekend. That can be 5 days in a row. Are you really willing to put in that many hours doing what you do? If you're passionate about it and you love what you do, the saying is, if you love what you do, you'll never work another day in your life. I mean, it's still hard physical work and mentally draining and sometimes soul-sucking, but if you really love to do it, you quickly kind of cross the line into, I have to do this. I mean, this is what I have to do. And for me, like when I started playing around with the camera for the first time, and the storytelling bug kind of hit, it was like this big white light. Go to the light, It's like all of a sudden it just made so much more sense to, get into storytelling than editing single photos in Photoshop. As good as I may have been, and even though I had plenty of work and it was a secure gig, it wasn't nearly as compelling on so many levels. And so I went from that point of like, yeah, I kind of like to try this, to like, oh, I have to do this. So that's, I think, really a very important first step. And then from that point forward, some people recommend film school. I think there's great advantages to film school. I didn't do it because I got into this game way late. I think the advantages of film school would be that, you have a structured introduction to the craft, and it is a craft. It's not a science. It's not an art. It's a craft. You learn the mechanics. You learn, set etiquette. You learn, the mechanics of what it takes on all the different levels. And you also get to experience, like, do I want to be a director? Do I want to be a scriptwriter? Do I want to be a camera operator? Maybe gaffing, running lights is for me. I want to be a sound guy. There's all these different disciplines, and they're all extremely important. And you can't do all of them very well, so eventually you'll want to specialize in one. But this film school is an opportunity to explore. And also you have the advantage of having a group of people that you can do projects with. So right off the bat, you've got this built-in access to crew. So if you want to make like a 48-hour film contest or like a weekend passion project, you got people you can call on before you've even gotten the experience. The experience part is always the rub. It's like, how do you develop, how do you get a job? Well, you can't get a job until you have like a film reel to show your work. Well, how do you get a film reel if you haven't shot anything? So, it's like that catch-22. Well, shoot on your iPhone. Storytelling is storytelling regardless of the gear. And, you'll make lousy first films whether you're shooting on an ARRI or an iPhone. But you'll still gain the experience regardless of the camera. So just get out there and start doing it. Shoot a bunch of stuff and be okay with failing a lot, because it's like as soon as you start recognizing your failures, that's a sign of progress. You learn most from the stuff you screw up, right? Anybody can like go on YouTube, watch a tutorial in After Effects and mimic the tutorial and follow the steps and copy it. That's part of the process. But when you start applying that and you start modifying it to adapt it to like a particular job or a particular film set or a scene or whatever, that's when you start applying the craft. So you're going to go through all the exercises regardless of what it is, but you have to, at some point, be able to have the requisite skills to do whatever job or task is called upon you. And you're going to fail more than you're going to succeed starting out, but that's the learning process. And you actually have to embrace the failure part, because that's when you know you're learning. I mean, hopefully you don't make the same mistakes, you make new mistakes. And new mistakes, I'm still making them. And I kind of, I bristle at the fact that, at my age, I'm still making mistakes, but as long as they're new mistakes, I'm okay with that. So get used to making mistakes, get used to failure. And if you don't go to film school, that's okay too. Get involved with like your local film community. I mean, pretty much any, large town on up to city metropolitan area is going to have a film community. Seek them out. There's obviously Facebook groups. There's obviously, meetup groups and Craigslist or whatever. And if you can't find a film group, create one. Right. If you can't afford to hire or gather the interest of talented actors, call on your friends. As far as the gear goes, rent, borrow, don't steal. But if you do steal, make sure you return it. But again, use your cell phone if you have to. Yeah. Just get into the swing of things and do it, and you'll probably be, in spite of the failures, you'll probably be pleasantly surprised. I don't know. I think there's great joy in just seeing the stuff come together. Going back to my making models, I don't know why I got into it, but I just found like very satisfying to glue pieces together and like, ooh, look at that. And it's the same thing with like an edit. Like I try to plan shoots very carefully with storyboards, but a lot of times that just doesn't happen for a variety of reasons. And yet there's that serendipity when two shots come together in an unexpected way. And you'll experience the same thing if you're brand new to filmmaking. You'll be surprised to see the process and see how it works, and you'll be frustrated by it too. But if you stick with it, in a very short time, I think you'll start getting you'll get those little wins. You want little wins. Lots and lots of little wins. No big surprises, no big epic films. Don't even think about that. Just enjoy the little wins, and they add up really fast. As long as you keep doing it, you got to start.
I wanted to plug my own film school experience real quick. I went to Seattle Central with Sal Tanaccio and Sandy Siafi, who were both badass New York filmmakers who came to Seattle and enlightened us with their experience, and just some real beautiful classmates who accepted me even though I was a little bit older than most of them, all of them. But There are advantages to film school, but to the listeners out there, unless you're wealthy, and that's super cool, I would recommend not spending a ton of money on film school. I got lucky, and it was a community college here in Seattle that had a program at Seattle Central. And there's still some things like that around. The other thing, when you consider like school is going to cost you, like consider saving some money and spending a year volunteering on crews, and it doesn't take you long to get paid a fair rate to be a production assistant. And if you've done that enough, you might find yourself, if you're attracted to camera, maybe you're a second AC, a second assistant camera, or one of these other roles, you know, art department, or, you know, just hundreds of things that that everybody needs an assistant or a second assistant. And pretty soon, if you're willing to work up through the ranks, you know, in some ways that's better than film school, but it does take a certain personality. I really value what I gained in film school, but I had some awesome teachers, and it didn't cost me an arm and a leg. So
Yeah, yeah. I think anything will work if you apply yourself. And like you mentioned, a production assistant, that's actually a really good for someone to get into, because one, it's a fairly broad term. I mean, a real production assistant on a Hollywood set has more defined rules, and they usually go in with a certain level of experience. But you know, in a local film group, you could basically be the person that drives a truck or helps lug equipment or any number of things. But the advantage of being, you know, getting on as a production assistant is like, yeah, maybe the first couple of times you do it, you'll do it for the experience, you'll do it for free. And that's a completely different conversation about whether you get paid or not. But I think the cool thing about being a PA is you get to observe and you get to see how things work. I mean, there's a machinery going on. And if it's a good crew, people do have very defined roles. The smaller the production, there's more overlap. When you get into a bigger crew, people have more finite roles, and so there's less overlap. But a production assistant at least gives you the opportunity to observe. You're not going in, I mean, you wouldn't go in as like a camera assistant without any experience, because you're not going to last the first day, you know. Whereas a production assistant, you could basically just make yourself handily available. And my one suggestion to someone, you know, who's getting into that and they want to start off as a production assistant, the PAs that I find the greatest to work with are the ones that are like basically always available, always listening, always paying attention, so that if you need someone to go grab a C-stand, you don't have to go, hey, where is Bucky? I need a PA, you know? I mean, it seems like a rather prima donna kind of thing, just like, where's my PA? But really, I mean, if that's your job, is to be an assistant, being ready to assist, being on the ready is a huge one. And by extension of that, the experienced PAs, they will have that C-stand in hand as the gaffer's setting up light, just in case they might want to put a flag up. They're thinking like 2 steps ahead, like a good chess player. And so a PA can be an extremely valuable person on set. I mean, you know, they're often perceived as like lower on the totem pole, but no. I mean, if you don't have your PA, that means like, I've got to carry my C-stand. I love having a PA on the set. And yeah, you're right. I do a lot of very small crew gigs, a lot of like sometimes solo shoots where I'm camera, light, and sound.
And
you know,
hauling gear.
Yeah, and hauling gear, yeah. So a PA to me is no small potato by any means. But it's also a good way to get introduced to the film biz without like having this film schooling, observe and kind of get a sense. It's a very safe place, safe form of entry, I guess.
A note to all the PAs out there, or prospective PAs, remember you also can work for the sound department.
Yes.
Don't ignore requests from the sound department or art department or crafty or any department. We all suddenly need help. It might be for only 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but it's going to be gold, and we're thinking of the big picture when we ask you for help.